ऑलराइट, अगला सवाल। किस तरह का संगीत पसंद करती हैं आप?
I like ghazals.
और कोई खास गजल सिंगर?
Yeah, बात निकलेगी तो दूर तलक जाएगी. That's my all-time favorite.
ऑलराइट, जगजीत सिंह। खाना बनाने का शौक रखती हैं क्या आप?
मुझे खाना बनाना आता है, मैं बहुत अच्छा बनाती हूँ, बट शौक अगर कहें तो नहीं है. बट आई लाइक कुकिंग दैट वे. अच्छा लगता है. तो
ओके। कोई खूबसूरत याद जो आप हमसे साझा करना चाहें?
yeah, I would like to share that beautiful moment of my life, and that was when my sons were born, and holding them in my arms was that moment. Nothing can compare to that. I mean, that's so close to my heart. Even today, when I think about it, it makes me smile. Yeah, I forget everything.
हाउ ब्यूटीफुल। कोई ऐसा लक्ष्य जो अभी आपके लिए हासिल करना बाकी है?
I don't set targets for myself, but yes, मुझे लगता है कि अभी बहुत कुछ करना है to make the society for the better place. तो उसमें मैं कुछ भी कर सकूं अगर तो मैं जरूर करना चाहूंगी उस दिशा में.
उमा जी, आप मुगल सराय से हैं और जिंदगी में इतने बड़े मुकाम आपने हासिल किया है। जो हमारे देश की बेटियां बड़े सपने देख रही हैं, हासिल करना चाहती हैं, उन्हें आप क्या कहेंगी?
मैं उनको ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि जब मेरे जैसी एक लेडी जिसकी शुरुआत मुगल सराय जैसी जगह से हुई थी. पापा वाज इन रेलवे, सो ही वाज पोस्टेड देयर. वहां से होकर मैं यहाँ तक पहुंची, एम्स, जो कि एक प्रीमियर इंस्टीट्यूशन है इंडिया का. तो अगर जो लड़कियां हैं, जो बेटियां हैं आज की, वो सपने देखें और खूब मेहनत करें तो वो कोई भी मुकाम हासिल कर सकती हैं. उनको कोई लिमिट सेट करने की जरूरत नहीं है.
आप ये मानती हैं कि शिक्षा एक वो हथियार है जो ताकत देता है हमारे देश की बेटियों को?
जी, मैं हमेशा ये कहती हूँ, शिक्षा और सोच 2 चीजें बहुत जरूरी हैं आगे बढ़ने के लिए. क्योंकि जो फिजिक है आदमी की, फिजिकल स्ट्रेंथ उतनी मायने नहीं रखती जितनी कि हमारी मेंटल स्ट्रेंथ मायने रखती है. तो सोच और शिक्षा 2 चीजें अगर हैं तो जरूर कामयाबी मिलती है.
और हम भी उम्मीद करते हैं कि जो भी आप करना चाहती हैं, वो आप जो भी लक्ष्य लेकर आप चल रही हैं, चाहे छोटे या बड़े, उन्हें आप जरूर हासिल कर सकें. इस दुनिया को बेहतर बनाने के लिए आप जो भी करना चाहती हैं, उसमें आप जरूर सफल हो. बहुत बहुत शुक्रिया डॉक्टर उमा, हमारे साथ बात करने के लिए.
थैंक यू सो मच. थैंक यू.
आज के तेजस्विनी कार्यक्रम में बस इतना ही. अगले हफ्ते फिर हाजिर होंगे एक और तेजस्विनी के साथ. नमस्कार.
सुरक्षा नियमों की जानकारी बिजली तूफान में आपकी जान बचा सकती है. सबसे पहले पूरी तरह से बंद इमारत या वाहन के अंदर जाने की कोशिश करें. ट्रैक्टर, रिक्शा, मोटरसाइकिल जैसे खुले वाहनों का उपयोग ना करें. लोहे की छप्पर, खुली पार्किंग, बन रही इमारतें और ढके हुए बरामदे सुरक्षित शरण स्थान नहीं है. पेड़ के नीचे शरण न लें. यदि आप जंगल में हैं तो सबसे छोटे पेड़ों के नीचे आश्रय खोजें. अगर आश्रय तक न पहुंच पाए तो आसपास की सबसे ऊंची वस्तु न बने. घुटनों के बीच सर रखकर दोनों एड़ियां छुए ऐसे उकड़ू कर बैठें. जमीन पर न लेटें. पानी और नावों से बाहर निकलें. पानी के खड्डों में खड़े न रहें. रबर के जूते पहने हों फिर भी. जानवरों को बाहर बंधा न छोड़ें. आपातकालीन स्थिति में प्राथमिक उपचार दें और एम्बुलेंस बुलाएं या अस्पताल ले जाएं. तैयारी में ही समझदारी. NDMA एवं IIPHG द्वारा जनहित में जारी।
Hello and welcome. You're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and I have with me a very special guest, Ambassador T.S. Tirumurthy, India's permanent representative to the United Nations in New York. Now, he needs no introduction, but just for the benefit of viewers who are tuning in from across the world, Ambassador Tirumurthy is a career diplomat. He is an officer of the 1985 batch of the Indian Foreign Service. And prior to this, he was Secretary Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs in New Delhi. He was also handling the Gulf, the Arab world, Africa, and India's development partnership. He's also been India's High Commissioner to Malaysia, and he has served in Cairo, Geneva, Washington, D.C., and Jakarta. And he's also the first representative of India to the Palestinian Authority in Gaza, and he's authored 3 books: Kissing the Heavens, the Kailash Mansarovar Yatra, published in 1999, Clive Avenue, published in 2002, and Chennai Vasi, published in 2012. Ambassador Tirumurthy, welcome to DD India.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ramesh ji. I'm really very happy to be in your program. And also thank you for this very generous introduction.
Great, Ambassador. Let's start with India's election victory for a non-permanent seat at the UNSC starting on 1st January 2021. If I were to ask you, Ambassador, what would be India's priorities for those 2 years starting January next year?
Once again, thank you, Ramesh ji, for the giving me an opportunity to be in your program. And we are naturally very happy to be in the Security Council, and not just with tremendous support, but also at a very critical juncture. As you're aware, in the run-up to the election, the Honorable Minister of External Affairs, Dr. S. Jaishankar, he launched our set of priorities so that we can better inform the member states of the UN of our focus during our stint in the Security Council. And in fact, this outreach, frankly, has been very widely appreciated. And we have 4 broad principles, which comes under the rubric of what we call as norms, new orientation for a reformed multilateral system. And in our priorities, apart from other things, we have also tried to focus on the concern that the existing multilateral system is somehow inadequate to deliver results for all or meet the challenges of the 21st century effectively. The 5 priorities, basically, they relate to new opportunities for progress. That is one of them. The second is effective response to international terrorism. The third is reforming of multilateral systems. The fourth is a comprehensive approach to international peace and security. And the fifth is technology with a human touch. These are the 5 broad priorities which we have set for ourselves.
Ambassador, the Foreign Minister and the Prime Minister themselves have spoken of the 5S approach. Could you elaborate on that for our viewers?
See, actually, I'll elaborate on the 5 priorities,
sure,
which broadly encompasses the 5S approach which they have spoken about.
Mm-hmm.
The first priority, as you know, is new opportunities for progress. Now, India has been at the forefront of development and development partnership. And this is a role we have played right since independence in a variety of ways, including in the United Nations. We have been a big votary of, for example, South-South cooperation. And we also tried to give voice to the aspirations of the developing countries, and particularly in the recent past. And this is evident in the way we do development partnership. For example, the lines of credit, the grant, then the humanitarian aid, and this huge human resource development program we have in it. And also even in the COVID times, we have assisted more than 120 countries. So I think there is definitely, this is time has come for us to articulate our own agenda of development and peace. The second pertains to a more effective response to international terrorism. Now, this is something which we don't need any elaboration, and India has borne the brunt of cross-border terrorism for decades, and we have also been at the forefront of bringing this agenda in other international organizations to address the various dimensions and to make sure that terrorism and its sponsors are all comprehensively addressed. And so we do want to progress this agenda in the Security Council. The third one, as I mentioned, is reforming of multilateral system. The Prime Minister has made a clarion call for reformed multilateralism. And this is to address the growing disenchantment with with all international organizations, because there is a feeling that they are not reflecting the realities of the 21st century. And if you recall the IPSA group, the foreign ministers of the IPSA group, IPSA is, as you know, India, Brazil, and South Africa. Now, they had actually issued a standalone joint statement a year ago on the whole matter of reform of multilateral systems. So therefore, the reform of the UN Security Council will naturally be a very important part of this reform and the focus of our efforts. And the UN was 50 members when it was founded. Now it is 193. The fourth one pertains to a very comprehensive approach which you would like to take on international peace and security. Ramesh, as you know, the traditional and the non-traditional security threats have considerably increased. And it is extremely important for the Security Council to effectively respond to these security threats. And the other aspect is we are also the largest contributor of UN peacekeeping. And that is something which, it's very close to us. And it has been a part of our tradition, a part of our history. And we want to work closely with the partners to also address issues and clarify the mandate of the UN peacekeepers. I think it is important because now the armed conflicts which are coming are far more complex, far more difficult. And it is extremely important to protect the protectors, so to say, which is our peacekeepers. So that's another thing we do have in mind. And the fifth one is technology with a human touch. Now, this is an area where we have made tremendous progress, and you are aware of that. In fact, India has a technology which caters to the people, and it is very people-centric. And I think, and if you recall, my own ministry, the Ministry of External Affairs, we have set up a new division called NEST, New Emerging and Strategic Technology Division. So therefore, there is a lot of focus we would like to give to this, and we are confident that we would be able to take the technology and peace agenda forward.
Ambassador, India has been on the UNSC on 7 occasions in the past, most recently in 2011 and 2012. So if I were to ask you, Ambassador Tirumurthy, how has the world changed in the last decade? And how does that tie up with India's quest for more reforms of the United Nations institution per se?
No, you're right. You're absolutely right. And there has certainly been changes since India was last in the Security Council, a decade ago, 2011, 2012. And the global fault lines, for example, they're increasingly widening. The divisions now are far more stark, actually. And there is also greater uncertainty. And the inability of the traditional multilateralism, if I may call it that, to rise up to address to specific challenges has created a great deal of skepticism on whether multilateralism can deliver and they can meet the challenges. So the consequently, the solution, I think, is not to start reinforcing the status quo of multilateralism, which we all know. I mean, the solution is not to do more of the same, but to see how we can reform multilateralism to make it more focused and make it more responsive to the challenges of the 21st century. And this is what Prime Minister has in fact articulated. And if you have seen groupings like BRICS, for example, Now, BRICS celebrated the 10th anniversary in 2018, and a group like BRICS is a manifestation of the aspiration of countries like ours to have a greater say in the fast-changing world. Now, on the COVID pandemic has only served to bring these divisions to the fore in a much more stark type of way. Our External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar, just recently, mentioned that respecting international law, recognizing the legitimate interests of partners, supporting multilateralism, and promoting common good, they are the only way of building a durable world order. And I think that's a very, very important thing to keep in mind. And an important aspect of this is the reform of the Security Council itself, where we certainly feel that India has a legitimate claim.
As you referred to COVID-19 pandemic, that gives me a perfect segue to my next question. Now, COVID-19 is one issue that's confronting the world at large for the last many, many months now. How do you see the post-COVID so-called new world order, and how important will it be for India to be on the UNSC in the post-COVID era?
COVID-19 has in many ways impacted almost every country. And it has forced us to rethink the way we have done business with each other and how we have cooperated, for example, with each other as countries.
Right.
And I think here, India has an opportunity to be a major player in the post-COVID world as well.
Mm-hmm.
We should not forget that India brings with it decades of very significant contribution to implementing the goals of the Charter and also in the evolution of the various, UN agencies, UN specialized programs, etc. And so therefore, India has done considerably and significantly in contributing to shape the UN response on practically every major global issue. Whether it is climate change or whether it is health or whether it is the sustainable development goals, we have had a huge contribution. So therefore, I think as the largest democracy in the world with very, very strong multilateral credentials, I think the voice of India in the Security Council at this juncture will be extremely important. And I feel that it is also a great opportunity for India to shape the post-COVID world with our partners in the Security Council. That's how I see it.
Indeed. On that note, Ambassador Tirumurthy, thank you so much for making time to speak to our viewers on DD India. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rameshji. Thank you so much.
All right, time for a very short break here on DD India. Don't go anywhere. Keep watching DD India.
अरे बबलू, लॉकडाउन खुलते ही टहलने निकल पड़े। महामारी अभी फैली हुई है।
सरपंच जी टहलने नहीं, कहाँ पे वापस जा रहे हैं?
तुझे डर नहीं लगता वायरस पकड़ लेगा?
पहले थोड़ा बहुत डर लगता था, फिर पता चला कि अगर मैंने पूरी सावधानी बरती तो ये बीमारी होने की संभावना कम है। सबसे महत्वपूर्ण है ये मास्क। काम पर मास्क हमेशा पहनूंगा, समय समय पर हाथ धोता रहूंगा और दूसरों से हर वक्त कम से कम 2 गज की दूरी बनाए रखूंगा। खुद को, दूसरों को और अपने परिवार वालों को भी सुरक्षित रखूंगा।
अरे भाई, मेरी जिम्मेदारी बनती है तुझे चेतावनी देना, सो दे दिया।
जब देश के मेडिकल और स्वच्छता कर्मचारी रोज कोरोना वायरस से लड़ने का काम कर रहे हैं, तो हमारी भी तो जिम्मेदारी बनती है अपना काम करने की।
बबलू, तुझे कुछ हो गया तो?
हजारों लोग इस बीमारी को हराकर ठीक हो चुके हैं और अगर किसी कारण मुझे ये बीमारी हो भी जाए तो सरकार ने अस्पताल में हमारे इलाज के लिए पर्याप्त व्यवस्था कर रखी है। ये घबराने का वक्त नहीं, एक दूसरे का हौसला बढ़ाने का वक्त है।
अरे ऐसे क्या देख रहा है? तू काम पे जाएगा, मैं नहीं जाऊंगा, नाक नहीं कट जाएगी मेरी। चलो।
मास्क।
हाँ, मास्क।
अरे नाक तो ढक लो।
हाँ।
कोरोना वायरस से हमें लड़ाई जारी रखनी पड़ेगी, पर उससे डर कर नहीं, पूरी सावधानी के साथ डट कर चलिए। रुकी जिंदगी को आगे बढ़ाएं, देश को आत्मनिर्भर बनाएं। जय हिंद।
Welcome back. You're watching a special broadcast here on DD India, and we are focusing on India's quest for a permanent seat at the UN and especially in the wake of India's election as a non-permanent member on the UNSC after a decade. And I have with me Ambassador Ashok Kumar Mukherjee to speak to you, the viewers, about the road travel so far and the prospects for India at the UN going forward as well. Ambassador Mukherjee, thank you for your time and welcome to DD India.
Well, thank you for having me. And I greet your viewers. We have just won a famous victory and entered the Security Council for our 8th term since the Security Council was established in 1945. And I think that when we first entered the Security Council, it was in January 1950, coincidentally the month in which we also became a republic. And I think that this is an important point because what we keep emphasizing is that we are elected to the Security Council. And when we say that, we contrast it with the fact that 5 of the countries who have been sitting in that Security Council since 1945 have never been elected, and they are known as the 5 permanent members. So this is what I think viewers may like to think about, because when India has been elected 8 times, that means that within the UN General Assembly, there's a great degree of faith and confidence in India. And it is, as you said, once every 10 years that we have entered. But every time we have been inside the Security Council, we have seen how it has progressively become more and more ineffective.
Give our viewers a sense, if you will, about the atmosphere around that horseshoe table in the UN in New York. How do the meetings take place? Do tempers run high at sometimes? Give us a feel of the atmosphere inside and around that table.
Well, I have participated in the open meetings of the Security Council because when I was there, we were not a member. But in the open meetings of the Security Council, the meetings are conducted in a very formal way with the 15 members seated around the table, and each of the participants who are invited for the open discussions presenting their views within a period of 3 to 5 minutes. It's very rare that countries speak for longer than 3 to 5 minutes, but there have been cases when speeches have gone on for longer. In my time and now, I think the Syria issue is one issue on which a lot of hot air is generated inside the council chamber. But the fact that any resolution that is sought to be put on the table of the Council on Syria is vetoed by 1 or 2 permanent members demonstrates that even strong sentiments in the Security Council chamber cannot be carried through into a decision because of the veto. And I think that this is the most important point when we look at what is the big issue in the UN Security Council. The big issue today is that there is increasing dependence by the 5 permanent members on using this veto power. And the veto power is not a democratic power. It was not even negotiated in the UN Charter. It was brought in from outside, and it was made a condition for the other 46 countries in 1945 to agree to the United Nations. So this is something that needs to be looked at, and I believe it needs to be reviewed. There are some issues which affect the way in which countries and entities participate in Security Council debates. One of them relates to issue which is not spoken of too much, but leaves a very strong taste in the mouth, which is the European Union. When the European Union participates, they are not a member of the United Nations, but they always manage to get a slot to speak ahead of member states. And this is something that arouses a lot of bad blood, as I would say, among the membership of the General Assembly. But I think that the main issue inside is the theatrics between the 5 permanent members. And you'll find that the elected members are normally quiet. They do not really assert themselves because they know at the end of the day, the decisions will depend on Article 27, paragraph 3 of the UN Charter, which is the veto privilege given to these 5 permanent members.
And that, since you mentioned the veto powers of the so-called P5, that gives me a perfect segue into my next question. And that has to do with India's quest for a permanent seat at that table in New York. Help our viewers understand, if you will, Ambassador, India's quest for that seat. When did it begin? How did it begin? And what's been the journey so far and the prospects for India getting onto that table in the near future?
Well, when the Security Council was created in 1945, India was still a colony, although India was a founder member of the United Nations. There were 2 signatures on behalf of India on the UN Charter, one on behalf of British India by Sir Ramaswamy Mudaliar, and the other on behalf of India's princely states by Sir V.T. Krishnamachari. Now, when India became independent, the first thing that independent India did was to seek a seat on the Security Council, an elected seat. And it was unfortunate that in 1947, when the elections were held, India was not able to get a 2/3 majority for the vacant seat and had to concede that election to Ukraine. And it was only in the next year that India again sought to be elected, and India eventually got elected, as I said, to the seat falling vacant on 1st January 1950. That was the first time that we became an elected member. Now, between 1950 and 1963, the first phase of India's participation in the Security Council was mainly guided by the need to have more of a representation, especially from newly independent former colonial countries who were becoming members of the General Assembly. And because there were only 6 seats given to elected members, the first focus was to expand that number. And in 1963, despite the opposition of 4 out of the 5 permanent members, the General Assembly carried a resolution in December 1963 by a 2/3 majority, amending the UN Charter and giving more representation. And the representation was mainly for the newly independent former colonial countries. So in this format, the Security Council met for the first time in 1966 with 10 elected members and 5 permanent members. Now, the second phase of India's experience was that between 1966 and 1979, by which time India had already served 4 times as an elected member, it was clear that the permanent members showed no interest in allowing any meaningful participation or any, as we call it, equitable participation in decision making in the Security Council. And that gave birth to the successful attempt by India and 9 other developing countries. India was represented by Ambassador Brajesh Mishra, who later became National Security Advisor of India under Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji, to inscribe an item on the General Assembly agenda seeking equitable representation. Now, these 2 words are very important because equitable goes to the heart of the problem, which is equal participation in decision making, which means that we have to deal with the issue of the veto. And representation means that when the membership has grown so much, and between 1945 and today from 51 to 193, then we need more people around the table to express their views. So both these issues were inscribed by India and successfully, but the permanent members prevailed in deflecting this proposal to 1992. And it was only in 1992, after the Cold War ended, and there was a brief period of a unipolar world, that the first discussion started. So when people talk about the discussions on Security Council reform, they actually started in 1992. And by 2005, it was clear that these discussions had shown that the Security Council had been unable to prevent horrible outbreaks of violence which threatened international peace and security, not only in the Balkans in Europe, Srebrenica, for example, but also in Africa, Rwanda, the genocide, and in Asia, Afghanistan, and then gradually the deterioration in West Asia. So confronted with this, in 2005 began the third phase of the reform movement of the Security Council, in which India played a major role, which was to get the summit of world leaders meeting in 2005 at the 60th anniversary of the United Nations to unanimously agree on early reform of the Security Council in order to make it more effective and to enable it to implement its decisions on the ground. These are the very words of that mandate. But then after the summit, everybody expected the forward movement, but the permanent members blocked this through their secretariat influence. And it was only in 2007 that India took the lead to create a group of developing countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America called the L69 group. And the L69 looked at the mandate given by the summit of 2005 and said by 31st December, we must table a resolution. And confronted with this activist approach, the broader membership, some of them under the influence of the permanent members, agreed that we should now start discussing this mandate, but in a negotiating mood. And that created the intergovernmental negotiations which we speak of when we speak of reform of Security Council today. The major decision of 2008, again led by India, was to clearly indicate 5 areas for Security Council reform. And these 5 areas were again identified unanimously. And this is very important because sometimes people think that there is no unanimity in reforming the Security Council. But the 5 areas were categories of membership, the question of the veto, regional representation, the size of an enlarged Security Council and its working methods, and the relationship between the Council and the General Assembly. So logically, in the 4th phase, expectation was that there would be a text on the table with these 5 areas on which we could negotiate the amendment to the UN Charter and for reforming the Security Council. Unfortunately, that did not happen till September 2015, when a group of 120 countries finally wrote to the President of the General Assembly, who was from the African group, Foreign Minister Kutesa of Uganda, and persuaded him to table a document containing their views. So that document was tabled in September 14, 2015, and should have formed the basis for negotiation. But then the story after that, between 2016 and today, is that a tremendous pushback by the permanent members. And in this one, it was openly led by China. China has aligned herself with the group of 12 countries called the Coffee Club or the Uniting for Consensus, who oppose any attempt to touch the privileges of the permanent members. And that is why it is deadlocked, because there is no paragraph by paragraph negotiation and there is no end timeline. There is no deadline against which the intergovernmental negotiations must conclude. And both these are very odd for a UN process. And that's where we are today.
Another issue facing the world today, Ambassador Mukherjee, is the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, when we talk of the so-called post-COVID New World Order, what kind of a future do you see for multilateralism as we know it today?
Well, I think here we should look at 2 sets of issues. The first set of issues flows from what I've been talking about so far, which are the political issues. Now, it is a very sad commentary on the United Nations Security Council that till today it has not been able to adopt a resolution, political resolution to support a global campaign to confront the impact of COVID-19 pandemic. It's the first time this has happened. Even when Ebola took place in Africa, or HIV/AIDS took place in several continents, the United Nations Security Council provided a unanimous political support. This is the first time it has not, and the reason it has not is because of the polarization between 2 of its permanent members, the United States and China. And I think therefore that the post-COVID world must address this issue of these permanent members who are today using their domestic priorities to actually dilute the principle of international cooperation on which the United Nations and the multilateral system is based.
Right. Ambassador Mukherjee, on that note, thank you so much for making time to be on DD India. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's a wrap on this special broadcast. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.
Carelessness while building a house can prove costly at the time of an earthquake. To avoid any cracks due to an earthquake in a house made of bricks and stones, apply seismic bands at lintel and plinth level, and for houses in Zone 5 at sill level also. Fix steel bars at every corner and joint. You are safe if your house is safe. Always ensuring your safety. NDMA.
हिंदुस्तान एक ऐसा मुल्क है, अनेक प्रकार के लोग रहते हैं, बहुत से अलग अलग मजहब है, अलग अलग जाति है और अलग अलग हमारा पोशाक है, अलग अलग हमारी जबान है। ऐसा कोई मुल्क दुनिया में नहीं है